Great. I do have a question. If somebody is signed on and gets the link to the Shiur, can they also get the link to the recording automatically?
That's a question to me, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. Automatically, I have to. I make the recording available on YouTube, and then I send the link in the WhatsApp group. Whoever is in the WhatsApp group automatically sees that. Whoever is not in the WhatsApp group, I don't know about.
Okay. So I might get somebody, Rabbi Dr. Mishilov, who was with us last time and wants to continue, but he can't make it in person. I'll get him to speak to Shmuley and then get him on the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, one second.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
so
anybody can join him.
Good evening, Marcel.
Hi, I said anyone can join him.
Anyone can join in.
Can add him to the group just with his phone number.
Okay, so I will tell him. Share screen. Here we are. All right. So.
Yeah, actually, you can also add him. You are the administrator of the WhatsApp group. You, Shmuley, Yael, and myself.
Okay. I will see what I can do.
Okay.
So let's begin with the English. So we're continuing with the Marshal and covering one's head as a man. So, Jack, line 3, Marshal then proceeds.
Marshal then proceeds to admit that since the minhag of male head covering when saying brachot, mentioning God's name, is so strongly entrenched, he feels constrained by it to the extent that he is not prepared to issue a clear-cut permissive ruling in the present case.
So what we have here is an interesting point. Marshal actually says that Meikar Din, and this is part of the Lithuanian approach, which was started by the Marshal, Rav Shlomo Luria. After that, all the Litvaks climbed on the bandwagon. But the idea was to go back to the Gemara and only the Gemara and not pay that much attention to Polish pilpul or to minhagim. But here he's got a very sensitive issue. Keeping one's head covered as an Orthodox Jewish male is like in our blood. You know, you come out of the womb and you reach for your yarmulke. So the question is, how can he give a heter and say it is okay? So he doesn't want to do that, okay? And then before he actually tells the questioner what he should do, questioner says, look, I have a problem. I have a very sensitive head, and anything that's put on my head is very painful for me. I mean, lahavdil, I guess, is a little bit like gout, except gout is the foot and not the head, but people who have gout cannot have anything on their foot at all. So perhaps this is something similar. But the Marshal does take a step slightly aside, doesn't continue with the actual issue, okay? It's a posek. He does know what reality is. And then he goes on to the question of learning. Can you learn Torah with a bare head? So, Jack, could you continue from the end of line 5 similarly?
Although there would not appear to be any halachic problem whatsoever for someone with a sensitive head to study Torah bareheaded, provided that he does not utter God's name. This should be avoided because of the importance people attach to wearing a head covering.
So the Marshal says, you know, the same reservation I have applies to learning. When we learn Gemara, we're not saying God's name. So according to all the sources that the Marshal has cited, there ought to be no problem at all. But still, people would be very surprised and not shocked by the fact that somebody's learning Gemara mitablois in the kop with nothing on their head. Okay, I don't know whether that translates into Swiss, but that is exactly what we are saying here. Moreover, Jack, please, to avoid scandal.
Moreover, to avoid scandal, Torah should not be studied bareheaded, even in private. In a private, secluded room because of Marat Ayin, which, according to the Talmud, even applies in private scheduled room.
Secluded room. Okay, bechadrei chadarim. Jean, would you like to read the Marshal's words?
ומה אעשה שהעם נהגו בו איסור, ואיני רשאי להקל בפניהם.
I cannot really break what this strong custom of having your head covered as an observant Jewish male. V'shamati.
איני רשאי להקל בפניהם seems to me to be a remes to Gemara, if I don't, in Psachim 51, 52, where it is indeed told that someone may not eat something that other people don't in their face. I think it's in this area.
As in Psachim Peridal, we're talking about a chumrah, okay? And exactly, it's makom shenagu. We're talking about something slightly different. Bechadrei chadarim, okay?
ושמעתי על חכם אחד, כשהיה לומד בגילוי הראש, ואמר שכבד עליו המסע. I wanted to tell you last time also, this notion to be begilui harosh is not very clear, because I think there are some authors who say gilui harosh because yarmulke would be gilui harosh, but they had in Kiddushin, they had needed a special hat. I'm not sure that when someone speaks of gilui harosh, it is the same meaning for anyone.
You are exactly right, and we're going to get to that. But I'm glad that you've brought us a Polish drei, okay? We find in the Nachalat Binyamin and in sources from Galicia that perhaps the whole issue of Gilui Rosh is not actually a blaze in the cup, nothing on the head at all, but it means not wearing a respectful headgear, as you would before a Talmid Chacham. So if I change the whole subject, not to actually a bare head, but not a respectable, then also I can go with Reb Shlomo Kluger to the fact that in order to say daven, you have to have both a yarmulke and a hat. And we go to all sorts of places from there. But the Marshal would not be very happy with that. He would say that you are twisting the meaning of the Gemara. Rosh Galui, we learn about in Masechet Sofrim, or in the
maybe Sota
Midrash, which is about a society in Second Temple times in which Rosh Galui was Rosh Galui. We get the Sudar in Bavel that a Talmid is meant to wear if he's in the presence of a greater Rav, but that is all kind of moving away from the truth and the point. So, indeed, it exists, and we'll see how Rabbi Waldenberg works all of this in. Very interesting indeed. Umikol makom nireh be'einai, Jean?
אף שאין איסור בדבר, ואף לא מידת חסידות.
It's not a din, and it's certainly not even pious. If you have a sensitive head, you don't have to put anything on it according to the Marshal.
אינו מזכיר השם, מכל מקום לתלמיד חכם יש לו להיזהר, מאחר שהעם תופסים בה לקלות ולפריצות.
If a Talmid Chacham is studying Gemara without a head covering, everybody will say, Oy vey, he's a sinner, he's an apikoros, okay? How can he possibly do that? As if like a woman, he's not a married woman, not covering his head. They think it's the same thing. Again, you see the Marshal always wants us to keep halakhic categories clear. It's not dat Yehudit by any means. It's totally different. Women are a totally different issue. Dat
Yehudit means midrabanan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but no. But it is midrabanan that comes from the people. I mean, Hag solidifies into a very important rule, whereas dat Moshe is written in the Torah. Okay.
ואפילו לומד בחדרו, אין לסמוך על זה, שמא העם הארץ יראה ויקל בו.
The
Lo
akabo
bechinam.
means makes him, the Talmid Chacham, into a kala, okay, to somebody who doesn't care about halacha.
ולא בחינם אמרו כל שאסור מפני מראית עין, אפילו בחדרי חדרים אסור.
Now that's a statement, it's in Masechet Shabbat, okay. Rav says that if there's something you shouldn't do because people might misinterpret it, then you can't do it even in a private secluded room. The actual issue there is an issue of tvisa. Can you take a moist garment inside your private room on Shabbat or Chag, sit in it and dry it out that you'll be able to wear it in public afterwards? Because it looks a little like kvisa, which you aren't allowed to do. That's Rav Shita, that you can't do it even b'chadrei chadarim. But just to cut a long story short, there are distinctions made by the poskim. Questions whether it is midoraita or midrabanan, where there's also an element of simchat yom tov. And the question is the maritime because you might be suspected of doing something wrong, or somebody might learn from you that something which they thought was wrong was permitted. So something that everybody knows is wrong, like marrying your sister, okay? You may be able to marry your stepsister in Chadrei Chadarim because nobody's going to marry their sister. At the worst, they'll think that you have committed a sin. Somebody sees a Talmid Chacham wearing a wet garment in a Cheder Chadarim, they'll say, we can do drying out of Kvisa on Shabbat or Chag, and that is a problem. But it's a whole topic, and we're not going to go into it, but we are going to continue to read. Thank you, Jean. Marcel, you're next on my screen, line 17. Marshall takes the opportunity. Marcel?
Are you with us?
Marcel, are you ready to read? You have to unmute.
I have
Great.
been.
Line 17, Marshall.
Maharshal takes the opportunity yet again to criticize those who wrongly put head covering on a high halachic pedestal and denounce anyone who eats with an uncovered head, but neglect basic binding laws such as kashrut. He also singles out rich and influential Ashkenazim for this critique.
He's done that before. We saw that last week. Now he does this again. V'achshav, ani agale et kalon ha'Ashkenazim. I will reveal the shame of the Ashkenazim, not Sephardim, and we'll explain that as we move on. B'vadai mi sheshoteh yeh nesech b'malon shel goyim. When you go to a non-Jewish inn and you drink their wine, v'ochel dagim mevushalim b'chedim shelahem, and you eat the fish that they have cooked, the notorious fish eaters, okay, of certain West European communities. Outside of their home, they'll eat fish. And the most machmir of these Ashkenazim is somebody who actually questions the owner of the inn and says, have you cooked these in a different pot from the meat? Ein choshishin alav, they can do whatever they want. And if he's rich and powerful, he has standing in the community, everybody's very nice to him, and nobody questions what he does when he meets his business partners, okay, and does deals in non-Jewish inns and eats and drinks. And somebody who eats perfectly kosher, Rakshaya Biguri Rosh with nothing on his head, and Jean, that doesn't mean he had something more respectable on his head. It means nothing. Hayuv Tofsino Tokilu Yatsamin Aklal. He's left the Jewish people. How dare he eat without anything on his head? So, after having made the point about the fact that he has to advise the questioner that, you know what people think is important, and I as a posek cannot ignore that completely. And number two, I can get a dig in at those, again, who don't understand halakha and who make the important not so important, and they downgrade what is really significant. They don't criticize those who break the laws of kashrut, but they are extremely critical of anybody who eats without anything on their head. Now he goes back to his questioner. Bernie, can you please give us 25 in returning to his questioner?
Interesting that Marshall, who is a direct descendant from the rabbis of Worms, is now in the antagonism between German and Polish.
Okay. I'll leave that, but yes, it is an interesting point. Bernie, in returning to his question, line 25.
Am I heard?
Yeah, loud and clear. In returning to his questioner.
Okay, in returning to his questioner, Marshall recommends using a light covering most of the time, but if necessary, he can also cover his head with his hand if the need arises to remove that covering.
So what you do is you put something light. You know, you have a real pain in your head. So you use something light. You don't need to put on a big, heavy yarmulke or a hat. Just put something very light. Find something which is very light to put on your head when you're learning or davening or making brachot. Okay? So
and surprisingly, he also approves of covering with your hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if necessary, what do you do in the middle of the night if you have to awaken, have a drink, and you don't have your kippah or yarmulke or hat? You put your hand.
And if you don't have a sleeve on your arm.
Whatever you can put your hand on your head. That's what you do. Or you're in the swimming pool. In Iceland, you're in a hot swimming pool, and they come around with your Viking beer. Then you can put your hand on your head, you make a bracha, and you can make yourself warm inside as well as outside.
Has that some any value? It's
the blue lagoon.
Is that a covering?
The Blue Lagoon.
The Blue Lagoon.
Exactly, Marcel. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, the Blue Lagoon.
You get your drink.
You get to drink when you're in your hot pool. Okay, everybody goes there to unwind after work. So if you don't have anything on your head, you have to put your hand on it, according to the Marshal, and you can make your bracha, and then you can drink with fiery abandon.
Is there any disagreement about using part of your body as a covering?
There is. Irving, you're quite right. Some people object. But again, the Marshal says, well, you don't need to cover your head at all. If you don't need to cover your head at all, then it really doesn't matter. Again, it's a much later discussion. There is a view that if you are, say, in a bath and you want to eat and drink, you put your hand over your heart. Has anybody heard of that?
No.
Yad al halev. And then you can make your bracha and you go ahead. There you are. Many things that we haven't touched upon too. So if we just read the Bernie, would you like to have a crack at the last line in the Marshal? Line 28, Al Kain hechacham einav b'rosho.
I can try it, but I probably should pass.
Okay, so if you'll pass, then we will see. I'm going to just have a look down. Avi, would you like to have a crack? But you have to.
Yeah, I got it.
Great. Okay, so he begins by saying, you have to look ahead. You have to think about the consequences of your actions. This is the case where, halakhically speaking, you'd be perfectly okay to have a naked head. Okay, but you got to think about what people are going to think and how they are going to react. And sometimes that dictates what an observant Jew ought to do. So, Chacham einav b'rosho, the wise man has eyes in his head to see in the future or to predict what the consequences of his actions will be. And you know what? Don't get into a scandal. All right. So, sheyeda li shamer, Avi.
שלא יתפסו עליו, אם כבד עליו להניח על ראשו דבר כבד, יכסה ראשו בבגד פשטן דק או במשי.
Meshi is silk and pishtan dak is very thin linen.
Flax.
Find the appropriate headgear. ומכל מקום,
כל מקום נראה, אפילו מי שירצה לברך ברכת נהנין, והוא בלילה שאין לו כובע עליו, או כאשר רוחץ באמבטי, די לו במה שמכסה את ראשו בידיו. ואף שגדול אחד העתיק, העתיק לאיסור.
So there's always a opposing view, okay? But here the Marshal is able to say, I'm not accepting that. יש
לחלוק מספיק בכיסוי היד, בפרט לפי מה שכתבתי שאין בו איסור, כי עם חסידות, מספיק לו כיסוי היד בפרט באקראי בעלמא.
But when you're caught, either in the Blue Lagoon in Reykjavik, or you're in a bath, or you're at night, then Marshal says, look, you oughtn't to need any head covering at all. But, so therefore you can use your hand. Okay. So this is the tshuva of the Marshal, the seminal tshuva in the area of head covering. And we've learned a lot about the approach that he taught in his yeshivot, and they were major yeshivot, and his Talmidim were major authorities in his time. And this is the basis of the so-called Lithuanian approach. It's the Occam's razor, to use a philosophical term. We go to what halakha requires and no more. We don't get distracted by customs or, as we'll see next week, by Kabbalah. And we don't get involved in all sorts of pilpulim. And we're striving for the truth, okay? As it is represented in the Talmud, and not beyond that. All right. So let's take a somewhat broader view now and see what happens with Shulchan Aruch, Hagot HaGra. The Gra, of course, would be the apogee of Lithuanian halachic philosophy, Gaon of Vilna, and later Responsa. Some very interesting stuff. If you read the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, okay, what does a man do in the morning? Very short and terse. Asur le'elech b'komaz kufa. Like we learnt in the Gemara, don't draw yourself up to your full height and walk around with your nose in the air, because that's disrespectful to God. Maloch ol haaretz kavodo. That's asur in the Gemara. V'lo ye'elech arba amot b'gilui rosh. And you shouldn't go 4 cubits with an uncovered head. Now, when you pick up the Shulchan Aruch, do you know, have you read the Gemara? Do you know that there's a major difference between Komaz Kufa and Gilui Rosh? Have you looked at the Gemarot in Masechet Kiddushin and Masechet Shabbat, that going with a covered head is a special midat Hasidut? Not everybody's. Or when you read this one line, and that's all you have, would you assume that that the word Asur might apply to walking with an uncovered head as well? You may, okay? You may or you may not. But you'd have to be somewhat of a scholar or a thinker to make a distinction between the two things. So this is the danger of the code, and that's why Marshal was bitterly opposed to codification of halakha. One short, terse sentence doesn't give you anything of the richness you need. And also to deal with the question of the man who comes to you and says, I have a terribly sensitive head. Anything on it causing me terrific pain. Do I need to have my head covered all the time? There's no way you can answer that shaila just by having read this one line in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, now let's have a look at the Gra. The Gaon of Vilna. Okay, he has notes on the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to point out something of a formal nature. When we read the Beyur HaGra on the Shulchan Aruch, do we usually get a very short, terse statement, or do we usually get a very long one?
Shortest.
Very short, very short. And look at this. From line 3 until line 21. This is a very long gra and very atypical. Now, all I've done is I've bolded the bits and pieces that the Maharsha showed us. For example, he says, the later, it's not true that it is asur to walk with an uncovered head, which you might, if you just read the Tur or the Shulchan Aruch or the Rif, you might think is the case. But later, the Gaon says that's not the case. Midamrina beperk tetzain de Shabbat teitili. Learned that I should get a special reward because I cover my head. In other words, most normal people don't need to. V'chein beperk kama de kiddushin Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua, who says again something very similar. Tam kama chatzif ha'gavra shema mimata mechasya v'cholei. That's the Gemara in Kiddushin as well that talks about the fact that if you're in the presence of a Talmid Chacham, you should wear a sudah, a respectful head covering, and that's Jean what you may have been referring to. And why mata mechasya? Because there was a young man who didn't wear his special head covering, and they said, he comes from mata mechasya, which was in fact surah. And in surah, rabbis are to a penny, just like Jerusalem. So if you're going to put on your special hat every time you pass by a rabbi, you're taking it off and on all day, so you don't need to bother. Okay? And that's what the Gemara says, a very famous Gemara. Alma da surah lifnei talmid chacham. That's how the Gra interprets the basic sugyot. Uveperek kama de Megillah, line 8, pocheach. We learned the Gemara in Megillah, but that's of course originally in Masechet Sofrim, about the pocheach and that perush that it may be a rosh mugoleh, an exposed head, but that clearly is not the general. It's not the actual interpretation there. It's only a later version of Masechet Sofrim. And then Dra says the Medina afilu litpalel likanes lebeit knesset hakol mutar. The Gaon of Vilna says that you could go into shul and daven with nothing on your head, okay? And then we go to line 18, or Gama shekatav v'masechet sofrim, sheyesh omrim she'asur lotzi haskara b'rosh mugoleh, gam ken midat chasidut hu, b'gemara de brachot samach bet lo mashma ken. And the Gemara, again, is not mashma, that doesn't indicate that it would be against the halacha to do so. V'chen mi midrash Rabbah hanal lo itrakti aleichem. Remember the midrash Rabbah that the Marshal brought, that God says, I'm kinder to you than a Roman ruler. When you hear my prostagama, my special command, that's Shema, I do not require you to put something on your head. Mashma, that you can listen with an uncovered head. And say Shema. Klala de Milta. What's the Gra's conclusion? Ein isur klal barosh mugoleh la'olam. It's never forbidden to have an uncovered head, rak lifnei hagdolim, except in the presence of a very great rabbi. V'chen be'et hatfilah, or when you're davening. Az nachon hadavar mitzad hamusar, ushar hayom likdoshim she'omdim lifnei Hashem tamid. The Gaon of Vilna was holy, so he wore his tefillin and had his head covered every day, all day. But most people like us do not need to. So now we've been to Lithuania. Let's go to Galicia. Now this is interesting. That sits Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, born in Yerushalayim in 1915, to a Galician family and an outstanding Talmid, and he became the Rav Posek of Shaarei Tzedek, a member of the Bet Din Hagadol Irurim, the great Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court in Jerusalem. And he's going to take us into the Sephardim to a certain extent, and perhaps we'll understand what the Marshal says when the Ashkenazim get everything wrong. They think that a covered head is more important than kashrus because they don't have a rational perspective on what halakha is. So let's have a look. B'shulei tshuva, and we're going to see a couple of things here, but we're meeting Italian rabbis in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, they're a different lot to what we would expect. B'shulei tshuva, im achitum, ראיתי בספר שו"ת זקני יהודה לחכם האיטלקי, רב יהודה אריה ממודנה. Now, anybody know anything about Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh, Judah Aryeh of Modena in Italy? Well, yes. What can you tell us, Jean?
First of all, if I remember, there is not a photo, but a design of his face printed in some books, and I think he was bareheaded.
Right. Okay, that's not quite.
Secondly,
That's not him, but we do have a picture of him, and he has nothing on his head. We're going to have a look shortly at Moshe Chefetz Gentili, the author.
Which we gave him a hat.
Exactly. They gave him a hat. So Moshe Chefetz gets a hat.
Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Mimodena is
did not cover his head.
well-known rabbi, but I don't think it's, I would not say that he is a gadol. He was a rabbi, and he has a terrible defect that he was gambling.
Very good. Very good. As always, very impressive. Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Modena was born in 1571 in Venice, but as a child, he was an Illuijon. He read his Haftarah in Shul when he was 2.5. 2.5. And when he was 3, he translated the whole of the Chumash into Italian at the age of 3. Okay? He went to yeshiva in Padua, and he basically learned everything that there was to be learned, and he learned Italian literature. He studied drama, music, and dance. And he became a Dayan and a Rosh Yeshiva and a very popular darshan in Venice. Non-Jews came to the shul in Venice just to hear Rabbi Aryeh Yehuda Modena speak. He was a very talented speaker, and he had Jewish and non-Jewish students. He taught Shaul Mortera, who became rabbi in Amsterdam, and eventually put the cherem on Baruch
Spinoza.
Okay, now, he was a gambler. He was addicted to gambling. He couldn't help himself. And one of his early books was a work he wrote between 2 young yeshiva students, one arguing against gambling, the other saying that it was not actually forbidden. You can guess what the conclusion was. But anyhow, his linguistic talents were huge. But you're right, he wasn't regarded as a gadol, but he did write Ari Nohem. In 1639, we talked about this when we looked at the Zohar. He was one of the first, the second actually, because the first one was Del Medigio, who wrote that the Zohar could not possibly have been written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. His book is called Ari Nohem, The Lion Roars, and that, of course, attracted a lot of criticism, including from the Ramchal. But the book got to Sa'ana in Yemen and influenced Rabbi Yichya Kapach, who established the Dor De'ah movement against Kabbalah and Zohar. There's a lot to say about him. He was a Talmid of Rabbi Shmuel Arkivolti. Now, you've probably never heard of Shmuel Arkivolti.
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
What do you know about Shmuel Arkivolti, Jean?
He was a big grammarian, and if I remember, there is an exchange between him and Tosfot Yontov. I think that Tosfot Yontov required a haskama from Arkivolti when he published the Mishnah. His Tiferet, his commentary, what's his name?
Tosafot Yom Tov.
Tosfot Yontov.
Very good. Wow, I'm extremely impressed, as always. But Arkivolti has another claim to fame. He wrote Arugat HaBosem, which is his work on Hebrew grammar, and it was highly prized. He was a rabbi in Venice, and he gave smicha to Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Mimodena. But much more interesting is the fact that the Torah Temimah, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, cites him in the Torah Temimah, and one would wonder in which context. It's actually in Sefer Dvarim, and it's on the question of whether women are allowed to study Torah just like a man. It turns out that in Italy, there was such a woman in Venice, and she was criticized by the men in the shul who said that she should not be studying Torah just like them. And he writes as follows, and the Torah Temimah says, I've never heard of him. I know he wrote Arugat HaBosem, but I'm going to give you this so you can find it in the Torah Tamimah. And he writes as follows: U'ma'amar chachamenu kol hamalamed et bito Torah kilum limdat tiflut. The famous Imra of Rabbi Eliezer in Masechet Sotah. Whoever teaches his daughter Torah is as though he teaches her to be cunning and to use halacha for her own evil ends. Ulai ne'emar kisha'av malamda bekatnuta. Perhaps that's when you teach a girl who's very young. Shegam b'ma'alaleha titnaker im zach v'im yashar po'ala. And you don't know whether she's going to turn out well or not, character-wise. Devadai, of course, you could say the same of men to whom you give smicha. Devadai ki hai gavna ika lemecha sherov anashim datan kalot bevalot zmanam b'divrei havai uchruban ken chatu mikotze ruach. Omnam hanashim asher nadav libam otana lekorva el hamlacha. But those women who show promise and who come close to the work of God, mitzad b'chiratan, b'tov b'mashu tov, and they choose it rationally because this is the ideal. Hen hena ta'alena b'har Hashem. They are allowed to climb up the mountain of God. Tishkona b'makom kodsho, dwell in His holy place. Ki neshe mefot hena. They are wondrous women. Va'al chachmei doran la'adranu lahadranu l'sadran. And the rabbis of the time should support them, should extol them, should magnify their excellence. Lechazek ideihen ula'ametz zrootehen asi v'atzlichi u'min hashamayim yisauch. Okay,
The
so
beauty of the language is exceptional.
well, Arugat HaBosem, the Italians were the masters of Hebrew. They wrote plays in Hebrew. Modena wrote sonatas in Hebrew, piyutim, and modern Hebrew owes as much to them as to any other source. So, Hebrew, certainly, but this is the sentiment, and it's interesting because when you read the Torah Tamimah, he says, I never heard of this guy, okay? I don't know who he is. Torah Tamimah lived in a Vardok, okay? I mean, he knew the famous Ashkenazi poskim, but somehow he got hold of this. And he says it's in the in the Pachad Yitzchak. But in any case, there we are. Ar Kivolti was his teacher. The book on gambling, which he wrote when he was 13, and he was already an absolute addict, is called Sur Meira. Okay. But he was not able to. Now let's see what Rav Waldenberg has to say. Okay. This Italian Chacham, Yehuda Aremi Modena, Simanim Vav, Kuf Lamed Aleph, in his Shut Ziknei Yehuda, Ma shekatuv b'shvach hazimra bevet hakneset. Now, one of the issues in the 17th and 18th centuries, certainly, and 16th and 17th centuries in Italy, where they had Salomon di Rossi, they composed beautiful, sophisticated music for performance in the synagogue. Okay? Now, Modena was asked about this, and he says, of course, you can compose sophisticated music in non-Jewish style to be sung by choirs in shul. Uveheter kefilat milei tefillah, and you can repeat words. Okay? Repeat words. I know you're shocked, Bernie, but that's what Rav Aryeh di Modena said. V'omnam mitoch shivcho sham shel hanegina lefi chokhmat hamuzika. So what does he do, says Rav Waldenberg? He's praising sophisticated music. Hu ba lesaper b'genutam shel hamitnagdim lazeh. Then he adds shegdolim v'tovim mimenu hayu. He then criticizes rabbis who are far superior to him in their learning and their frumkeit. Okay, and he says they umitbatei b'dvarim botim, and he uses really coarse language. B'chanuto hashatzim she'einam mitpalelim lefi zeh b'shem Noarim kachamorim. He says that the good old-fashioned ballet tefillah, who don't have any musical skill, they sound like donkeys, okay? Velo yanimu kolam v'yikarei alehem natna alai bekolai. This is a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, and it simply refers to people who are raising their voices badly before God. Modena says that if you don't have a sophisticated musical sense and craft in your shul, then you are calling out to God like a dog and a raven, both of whom have ugly voices. So Waldenberg doesn't like that at all. Rav Waldenberg, he says, look, he's a prostitute, okay?
And he criticizes his Keno.
Yeah, he criticizes the old-fashioned ballet tefillah with no skill and no music and didn't have a very fine trained voice. וגם עצם שבחו את הנגינה בבית הכנסת על פי חוכמת המוזיקה ואת השצה שיוכל להשמיע קולו יחידי, כאילו 10 משוררים יחד. And the chazan who's learned how to project his voice, so he sounds, he has a very big voice. הוא מגוחך ובלתי מקובל. We should dismiss that criticism. כפי שכותב שם בעצמו שהמתנגדים לכך היו רובם מתופסי התורה, ולא מתקבל על דעת תורה גם מה שמתיר שם כפילת המילים. We don't want your sophisticated music, your bowdlerized Mozart. We don't want your repeating of the words. כמפורסם וכידוע מדברי ספרי הפוסקים גדולי הדורות שצעקו מרה נגד צרת ממרת זאת. It's a horribly spreading plague of leprosy. ועוד כמה רעות שאין לפרטם כאן. And you might get to all sorts of evils. So this is the Tshuva of Rav Waldenberg, which is actually about music in shul, okay, classical music and repeating of words. Ki hayo haya ish adam hafafat. Now he gets to assassinate the character of Rabbi Modena. He says that rabbi is an unstable person. המתהפך בדעותיו כחומר חותם, changes his mind, מנהל מלחמות נגד רבני גדולי עירו בצורה לא פחותה ממלחמת המשכילים נגד רבני דורם. And it's a bit like a maskil who's fighting the established Orthodox. ולא בעיני אחד היה מוחזק ככופר, and more than one thought that he was a heretic. ונראה מכבי עדות עצמו, הלך, what's the next phrase?
Velikova
Ala Rosh Birchovot Kiria, as you said, Jean. Rabbi Aryeh Leib, Yehuda Aryeh de Modena did not wear a kippah when he wasn't in shul or learning or saying brachot. He walked around as a mit a bloizener kop, nothing on his head. ובתוך המשך דבריו שם כותב כי דבר רז"ל צריך להבינם כפי המקום, הזמן והאדם. He says that words of the rabbis need to be interpreted in the light of the place, the time, and the people concerned.
It's reform.
Reform, exactly. כי אין קץ לדברים שמצינו להם ז"ל אסורים שנעשו מותרים בחילוף הזמן והמקום. Yehuda Ari Modena says that many things that were once forbidden in the Gemara now are permitted. And things change. And wearing a head covering is also something that's not cast in stone. V'yomar na Yisrael hale shekazeh Rav posek yikareh b'Rav Waldenberg, who is in our century, says, he passed away in 2008, so 21st century. Is this a rabbi and a posek? Lag meha osrim. He also makes fun of those who forbid people to play football on Shabbat. Are you allowed to play football on Shabbat? Yes or no?
In Reshut HaYachid, you mean?
In Reshut HaYachid, in outside of shul in the courtyard, boys were always playing soccer.
Depends how old you are.
If you're inside the courtyard of the shul, I remember as a boy, and it was a very frum Beis HaMedrash, boys would play football inside the court, in the chater, in the area of the shul. Okay? But there are some who said, no. There's no halakhic basis to this at all. And he was addicted to gambling. He could never be weaned. That was Modena's great downfall. He lost huge sums of money, by the way. And of course, this has an effect on the family. See his own report in his autobiography, which is called Chaye Yehuda. He wrote about 18 books, one of which was his autobiography. חיבר ספרים נגד חוכמת הקבלה, ארי נוהם, והזוהר הקדוש מאוד. Rav Waldenberg, of course, would regard that as a terrible sin to cast any doubt on the kedusha of the Zohar. למד ולימד להתחבר עם הנוצרים וקומריהם. He would teach non-Jews. He would walk around and discuss with priests. Terrible thing. היטיב למיזוג חוכמת ישראל וחוכמת יוון. And he wanted to combine Jewish wisdom with Greek wisdom. In other words, he believed in Torah and Mada. So have a look at his book, Ziknei Yehuda, Zilzel B'dinei Minhagei Yisrael, and he wasn't so careful about the Minhagei Yisrael. Dinim, I'm not sure, because I think there's a difference between Rav Waldenberg, and if he could speak to him, go back in time to Yehuda Aryeh Mimodena, who'd say that what you call din is not actually din. Either minhag or something that people believed in strongly. This is, of course, damning in his own Chayei Yehuda. He says, look, he confesses this quite freely. Shebiyom Shivasa b'Tammuz, shechamisha dvarim iru bo l'Yisrael ra'im v'chataim. 5 bad things happened. Nichnesah bo ruach shtut. This is what addicts, I guess, suffer from. A ruach shtut, the Hebrew phrase means a spirit of folly got into him. V'sichek b'kubia v'ifsid. And he went to gamble and he lost.
Can one who is a pasul la'ed
Yeah.
be posek?
Well, there we are. A posek is not an aid. Bernie.
Posek is not?
Posek is not an aid.
No, I know that. I just wonder whether somehow it's a category, maybe even beyond.
Well, what he would say, what Modena would say, is that he was a struggler right through life. And perhaps Mamakom Shebale Tshuva Omdin Midei Pam Tzadikim Gemurim Einam Yecholim La'amod. He never made a secret, by the way, of the fact that this is not a good thing. The book he wrote at age 13, when he found himself to already be addicted to gambling, was called Sur Meira.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult if you're an addict to be Sur Meira. So there were periods when he was clean, and then there were periods when he fell. I guess it's a bit like, can a posek who's an alcoholic, can somebody be a posek, or who drinks too much? Or other sorts.
He might be pasul the kahuna.
That's again different. Kuna is different. For him, it's Simchat Torah every day, right? You're thinking about the drunken duchenes. But in any case, he never, of course, never covered this up. And there could be worse crimes. Rabbis have committed worse sins than that. So he's saying that, he has this struggle. There are days and weeks when he's clean and when he is the great Rabbi Modena, and then he falls. There we are. He's a chacham. Rav Waldenberg admits, okay, he's a chacham, but he's a bad man. He says exactly what you said, Bernie. Are we going to trust the piskei halacha of a man like this? When he takes these very unconventional stands. Treat him like doeg ha. And now we get close to something that
subject.
Jean said a little earlier. So Rav Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, says, when it comes to walking and sitting with an uncovered head, Kol hayarei v'chared lidvar Hashem medatek umakpid al kach ad la'achat. Any chared, any makpid would never dream of going with an uncovered head. And he'll tell you where to find his tshuvot in his Tzitz Eliezer, and he cites the Nachalat Binyamin, Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev Braya, who was Hungarian, 19th century, Hungary. Okay, and he says, after an analysis of all of the entire topic, line 10, ואחר כל הדברים הנ"ל נראה לעניות דעתי להלכה דוודאי איסור גילוי הראש דת יהודית היא. He says it is דת יהודית. It's an איסור מדרבנן, and it's based upon the same idea as a woman who doesn't uncover her hair. It is an Isur D'Rabbanan founded upon what people thought. In other words, a minhag that was upgraded, okay, to a very special status. Havadai b'nei Israel kedoshim nagu ken me'olam shelo lelet nagu minhag. They always went, they never uncovered their heads. V'tovsim oto lekalut u'pritzut, and if you go around with an uncovered head, then you are a parutz and a kala. Vadai livneihem who dat Yehudit, so their children received this minhag of Kiddushin and Shabbat, when these rabbis, Rabbi Shuna, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, said, you know, I should get a reward for that. Midat Chasidut crystallized into a minhag that then transmogrified into Dat Yehudit. So it is the most powerful form of minhag there could ever be. Okay, that's the halakhic analysis of Rav Binyamin Zev Braya from Hungary. Okay, and then the Nachalat Binyamin cites Rabbi Israel Brona from Germany when they put somebody into cherem because he refused to cover his head when he was walking around. And now I want to draw your attention. Jean, could you read, please, line 18 from the word
ובכוונת דברי הגמרא בשבת ובקידושין.
Now, Shabbat and Kiddushin are two sugyot that prove clearly that having a covered head is only midat chasidut. All right?
Okay.
Now, read on. Kama v'chama.
כמה וכמה מגדולי המפרשים והפוסקים פירשו שהמכוון לא על גילוי ממש, שהמכוון לא על גילוי ממש, אלא על כיסוי שלו כראוי כיעוין בדבריהם.
Exactly as you said, okay? That what they interpret these rabbis have said, I'm special because they wore a very big hat, okay? They didn't rest content. They didn't say, I'm okay with a little yarmulke or a kapel or a kapeluch or a kippah, but they went all out. Or they wore two things. They wore a kippah, a yarmulke, and on top of that, a hat. And this became a way of getting around what the Gemara says very clearly. You can go with a bare head. Unless you want to do midat chasidut, unless you want to be very special. So what the Hungarian Acharonim certainly said was that we're talking about a special extra head cover that you could perhaps not have to wear all the time. So we who wear a kippah in the street, we are okay. But if we wanted to be really frum, then we wear a hat on top of our kippah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? As we know, there are those who say you've got to do that. Every time you leave home, you have to wear a hat. And if you want to be called up in shul, you have to have a hat. And then, of course, the hat,
it should be black.
Hatter's rule. Sorry, Bernie?
It should be black and perhaps have a large brim.
Exactly, yeah. Now let's have a look at two more things before we end. I want to do the pictures as well. This is Malamed Lahoil. We'll leave Rav Azriel Hildesheimer for another Gilgul. Line 27, Malamed Lahoil is Rabbi David C. Hoffman of Berlin. He came from Hungary. Actually,
Hungarian.
Yeah, actually it was Slovakia. But he had a good Hungarian background, and then he ends up in Berlin. So it's a bit of a culture clash. Let's have a look at this Sheila Tshuva, Siman Nunva. Line 28, Sheila. You have to go to court in Germany, okay? And you want to testify. You're not allowed to testify in a German court at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries wearing a hat.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very disrespectful. So can you go? And because you're a Jew, you have to take an oath on a Jewish Bible in Hebrew, which has got Shemotim. Can you put your hand on the Tanakh and say, I affirm. Say you don't want to say I swear, you could say I affirm, I will tell the whole truth, but you're not wearing anything on your head. That was the shaila he was asked. Tshuva. Any panai la'arith ka'et. I've got no time to answer. Now I'm far too busy. אבל עיין בכנסת הגדולה ליורד דעה סימן ק"ז דמקל בשעת הדחק. The Baal Knesset Agdolah, Reb Chaim Palagi, already paskined in Turkey in the 17th century that you could do this if it's B'shat Adchak. If you have no option, you can take an affirmation or an oath in a non-Jewish court on a Jewish Tanakh with an uncovered head. Vayen bebet Lechem Yehuda, Shar Ephraim, she'eviu ze vayen gam bebet Hillel Yoredeya, Siman Kuf Nun Zayin. If I could read off all these sources when I was too busy to answer the question, I'd be very happy. What you could do is you could bribe the clerk so that he would allow you to take the oath with a hat, okay? You slipped him $100 or something, okay? That's what Jews did. The Hungarian rabbis today, says Rabbi Hoffman, late 19th, early 20th centuries, it's interesting that he seems to imply that not everybody in Orthodoxy is as strict as the Hungarians. And this isn't such a long time ago. But okay. והנה בעת הזאת, הרבנים היראים, ועיין בהבירור בש"ס ופוסקים בשו"ת נחלת בנימין, which Rav Waldenberg cited, right? Rabbi Binyamin Zei Brya. והנה הגר"א, but how about the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna? בהגותיו, לסימן ח' סעיף קטן ב' העלה שאין איסור, אפילו להוציא אזכרה בגילוי ראש. You can actually, according to the din, pronounce God's name in a bracha with an uncovered head. אלא מידת חסידות. ומה שכתב שם בתשובת נחלת בנימין, שאם בבית חינוך שמו לחוק שסירי ישראל צריכים לשב דווקא בפריט ראש ועושים כן. Now, what the Nachalat Binyamin, Rabbi Shiur, who lived in the 19th century in Hungary, says is that there are government schools where Jewish boys are required to attend. And in secular subjects, they sit and learn with nothing on their heads. Okay? ועושים כן על דעת אביהם וראשי זה איסור גמור, says the נחלת בנימין, משום ובחוקיהם לא תלכו. It's חוקת הגוי. Now, this is the position that Rabbi Schreier and the Hungarian Gedolim adopted. And Rabbi Hoffman, when he was young and studying in yeshiva in Slovakia, he absorbed that approach as well. But now he's in Berlin, okay? And it's very different. B'nei B'kilat Kadisha Yereim, the Frankfurt, the Main. In the Auschwitz Gemeinde in Frankfurt, the Shimshon Raphael Hirsch Kihila, בבית החינוך שנתייסד מהגאון רבי שמשון רפאל הירש זצ"ל, שאני הייתי מורה שם בבית שנים וחצי. He said he taught in Hirsch's school for 2.5 years. יושבים התלמידים בשעת לימוד שאר המדעים מפריעת ראש. Secular subjects, you don't wear anything on your head. ורק בשעת לימוד תורה מכסים ראשם, וכן הוא במנהג בית הספר בהמבורג. Similarly in Hamburg. וזה נעשה שם על פי תקנת הרב הגאון מורנו הרב שמשון רפאל הירש זצ"ל. ובפעם ראשון שבאתי לביתו של הרב הגאון שמשון רפאל הירש, בכובע על ראשי. I went to visit Rabbi Hirsch when I arrived in Berlin in his home, and I wore my hat inside. אמר לי שכאן הוא דרך ארץ להסיר הכובע מעל הראש. כשבאים אל אדם חשוב, you come to see me, the director of the school, you have to take off your hat. It's disrespectful. And if another teacher who's not Jewish will see, שאני איני מסיר הכובע מעל הראש, לפני ראש בית החינוך, דירקטור, היה מחשב זה כאילו אני מבזה אותו. It would seem as if I was actually insulting the director. ובזה וכיוצא בזה אין בו בשום בחוקותיהם. This is not חוקת הגוי. Everything depends upon the time, the place, and the people. ואם כן בנידון דידן, אם השופט נותן רשות לכסות הראש בשעת השבועה, מה טוב. The judge says you don't need to wear a head covering, that's great. כל אחד בוודאי לכתחילה צריך לבקש מהשופט לכסות ראשו, ויאמר כי הוא מצווה לכסות ראשו בכל דבר שבקדושה, והשבועה הוא לא בלתי ספק דבר שבקדושה. אמנם, אם השופט אינו רוצה, but if the judge says, I'm sorry, I respect religion, but in this case I need you to take the oath without a hat, אין צריך לקבל עליו אפילו עונש ממון, and if you don't, you'll be fined in contempt of court. You don't need to be fined, you don't need to be in contempt of court. ויכול להישבע אפילו בגילי ראש. וכן פסק מערי רבי ישראל ישראל בפסקים וכתבים, etc., etc. Whenever it looks as if it's not that you want to be like the non-Jews, but you're faced with an issue where respect or dignity or financial loss or anything else requires you to take off your head covering, do it. Okay, that's not chukat hagoy. And then he mentions something that the Chaim Sha'al, the Chida, talks about the fact that you can perhaps sometimes, if you're in a position where you would need to take off your hat, and perhaps you're a teacher in a secular school, what do? You put on your head something called a perique. Line 8. What is a perique?
Une perruque.
Un perruque, a wig.
A wig.
So you may be able to solve the problem by wearing a wig. Okay? Anyhow, the last thing I want to show you, well, there are two things. One I might keep until next week, but let's have a look at the pictures here, if we can take a little more time. The portraits of Rabbi Moshe Chefetz Gentili, Italian rabbi, wrote a great Perush on the Torah called Melechet Machshevet. I was going to cite it, but there's no time. You can read about him here. Very famous Rav indeed. And this is he was the first rabbi to have his picture on his book. Now, can you see line 19? Can you see the picture of Rabbi Moshe Chefetz?
Moshe Chefetz.
It says Moshe Chefetz bitmuna, Moshe Chefetz in the picture, Bishnat Ayin Taf ben Mea Shana, right? Okay.
No, he was 46.
He was 46. Thank you for stealing my thunder. Okay. If you look, there's a ger shayim between the aleph and the hey. So it's not Mea Shana. He wasn't 100 years old. He was mem 40 plus 1 plus 5. He was 46. This looks like a 46-year-old man. He's got plenty of hair. By the way, no beard. And is he wearing a hat?
A perruque. A wig.
No, I think it's his natural hair. Okay? I think it's his natural hair. Looks too good. Okay? But he certainly is not wearing an obvious kippah. Now, this was in the first edition. In Taf Ayin, or Taf Ayin is, of course, 1740. It's Chameshet Alafim Arba Meot Veshivim, 1740, okay?
Yeah.
Rabbi Gentili, 1709, 1709, died in 1711. That's the first edition. Now look at the picture of him. The same book, the same rabbi, okay, in Germany in 1860. What differences do you see? First of all, what's he wearing on his head?
Black
A
kippah.
kippah.
Black kippah, nobody could mistake. The Zetzer Bocher didn't understand that Ben Mea Shana of this man is not 100, okay? He's 46. But the Zetzer Bocher, or whoever did the typesetting, didn't understand that. So he said, Ben Mea, how can he be? I have to make somebody who looks like this. So he touched the photo up. He's got white hair. He's got a white beard. He's got glasses because he can't see very well at 100. And what does it say? Ben Mea Shana Anochi Hayom. The Zetzer Bocher is very happy. He's got a pasuk, Moshe Rabbeinu.
Ben Mea Veisim.
But it doesn't matter. Ben Mea Shana. The whole thing is ridiculous. He never wore a head covering like all the Italian rabbis, okay? They certainly didn't have beards. Ramchal, the Mesilat Yesharim, never had a beard, okay? And we don't know that. He also got in trouble for all sorts of weird things, but they were very sophisticated, very learned.
Is he wearing a scarf that might require tzitzit?
He is wearing some kind of, this was a rabbinical scarf, yeah. I don't think it's a beged. really, okay? But he certainly didn't have tzitzit on this, okay? And you see this the same thing here. It's kind of the aniva or the cravat that they used to dress up rabbis in Germany, okay, and some in New York perhaps in the very early days. But this just shows you what effect folk custom elevated to the level of dat Yehudit has. That the printers in 1860 in Germany were constrained to make a portrait, to touch up. This is photoshopping at its almost most extreme. I'm going to say something about, to finish this off, devotion to male head covering next time. We'll look at Yitzchak Lei Peretz's 3 gifts, and we'll have a look at, there's a sefer out on all of the halachot, and we'll also talk about running the gauntlet. I've taken up more time than normal, so I hope that you will forgive me. Hopefully you found it somewhat interesting, and we will meet again, same time, same place, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, next week.
Okay, ta-da.
Okay, that's it.
What is the position today where it's dangerous in some areas to walk with the kippah?
According to the Marshal, no problem. Take it off.
Okay.
No problem. No problem. It should be absolutely no problem at all. Okay, we'll sum this up at the beginning of next week's shiur. We'll also start a new tshuva of the Marshal.